bit, around 5 minutes, about what we are doing. This is organized by Psychoanalysis India, which is an organization for promoting psychoanalytical treatment, education, research. And there are 3 locales in which psychoanalysis, which has been rumored to be dead for a long time, is still available in Delhi. One is the Psychoanalytical Unit in the Department of Mental Health throughout all the Fortis hospitals. The second is the Center of Psychotherapy and Clinical Research, part of School of Human Studies, where I'm teaching, and which is the, I think, the premier center for the teaching of psychoanalysis in India. And the official body which accredits and trains psychoanalysts is the Delhi chapter of the Indian Psychoanalytical Society. So this is the people who work in the Fortis facility, the Psychoanalytical Unit. And Psychoanalysis India, if you're interested about what is going on in psychoanalysis in Delhi, is available on the Facebook page, which, no surprise, is called Psychoanalysis India, and a web page which is also called Psychoanalysis India, and the Twitter handle which is called Psyche India, and the YouTube channel again called Psychoanalysis India. So if you want, you can access whatever is going on that front in Delhi. So welcome again. This is an annual lecture which was started last year. Last year we had the opportunity to hear Professor Nagpal give a memorable lecture in honor of Dr. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, whose works influenced not only psychology but also many other disciplines, from gender studies to anthropology, to management studies, and many more. Eric Kandel, the winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine, famously said that psychoanalysis still represents the most coherent and intellectually satisfying view of the mind. He was also Viennese like Freud. Now, before we start, I would like, there's a small request. I don't know whether we to say this are official sponsors, since I'm there in both places. We have launched an app called Quake Master. It is an app to detect and monitor earthquakes and to help locate and provide help, including psychotherapy, to those affected. So if you're interested in volunteering for telecounseling services, please write a mail to Roshi Pawar at psychoanalysisindia.com, or you can corner her right now. She's the lady standing there, smiling at us, and you can give your name, and we'll get back to you soon. And also another event on 27 June at India International Center, possibly in the same hall. We'll have a lecture by Alan Roden. It's called The Self in Psychoanalytic Therapy Across Cultures. If you want to find out more about the speaker, it's at alanroden.com. This is Dr. Anup Dhar, in case you cannot see him. And so he has warned me not to speak very much about it, but I think I will. He's an associate professor at the School of Human Studies, Ambedkar University. He started off his life, like Freud, as a medical doctor. But he's also a keen follower of the political and as a PhD in philosophy. On the one hand, he moved to histories of healing and philosophies of the body, and thereafter to mental health, especially post-Foucauldian psychiatry and post-Freudian, in particular Lacanian psychoanalysis. On the other hand, the critique of the extant imagination of the political took him to the interstices of Marxism, the Gandhi-Tagore debate, and the French feminist perspectives. He is currently a member of the editorial board of the Annual Review of Critical Psychology. His books include Dislocation and Resettlement in Development, From Third World to World of the Third, The World of the Third and Global Capitalism, The Indian Economy in Transition, Globalization, Capitalism and Development. He has just completed a book manuscript titled Psychoanalysis and Sexuation in Cultural Crucible, Genealogies of Aboriginalization. And you must beware, because this was supposed to be the title. This could have been one of the titles of this talk before the, so that would have been a tricky one. He is currently co-editing 2 volumes titled Psychoanalysis from the Indian Terroir, which is a compilation of papers from the first conference that we had last year, 2014, and Clinic, Critique and Culture, Psychoanalysis and Beyond. So welcome, Anup. Yes.
Thanks, Anurag. Really a big thank you to Anurag. He has been a friend all through in Delhi. Once I moved here, a very difficult city, and it's very difficult to have friends in this city, and Anurag has been one I remember. Today's discussion or talk, whichever you may want to put it, is on the Freud-Bose Dialogues. Is on the Freud-Bose dialogue, and to get into that dialogue, and in the 1.5 hours I have, I will try to work my way through how we could make sense of this dialogue, rather than what the dialogue was about, what the dialogue says, and we will see as we go along what are the problems, where are the landmines, what are the hurdles in making sense of this dialogue. I have worked through the talk in terms of about 7.5 problems, and I raise the problems one after the other, and I come back to problem 1 at the end. So I'll begin with problematic 1, move through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and come back to problematic 1 again at the end, which I thought was the most difficult problematic. And I may lose some of you, and Anurag was persistent on one point. Anup, it has to be simple, and there has to be a PowerPoint, and you must try your best to communicate. So I'll try my best. And he said it cannot be psychoanalysis and sexuation in cultural crucible. That was my first title. He said, no, this is not to be done. You speak on the Bose-Freud dialogue. It was good in a way because he fixed the topic for me. So I did not waste time thinking which way to go. It is Bose-Freud dialogue, and I'll try my best. The problematic 1 is a difficult problematic, but maybe when I come back to it at the end, it may render itself a little more amenable. So this is how I go. 8:15 around. Problematic 1 is coming to me like this. As I look at the Freud-Bose dialogue, and this is a real dialogue that happened between these two thinkers, and I'll come to who is Girindra Shekhar Bose, where this dialogue is happening, how it is happening. However, as I look at this dialogue and try to make sense of this dialogue, a few larger questions haunt the understanding of the dialogue. One is the larger question of culture. Second, a more located question of colonialism, within which this dialogue is happening between a German and an Indian. And 3, the question of psychoanalysis as it travels. I'll take up these strands one by one as we go along. And there is a hint of a possible power relationship, power gradient between the German Freud and the Bengali Freud. And one needs to make sense of what happens between the two of them. And the suggestion I'm putting forward is to see or make sense of the power or politics of psychoanalysis. One would perhaps need, and this I have to demonstrate, a psychoanalytic understanding of power or politics. And we will need a more sophisticated understanding of power or the political if one is trying to make sense of the power or the political in the psychoanalytic. And this opens up for me a few questions which I skipped for the time being, but come to what I would put down, and I'm starting with problematic 3, and I'll come back to 1. Problematic 3 comes to me like this: as we try to understand the Freud-Bose dialogue, 2 issues come up over here. One is how to read Girindra Shekhar Bose, how to understand what Bose is saying, how to understand this dialogue between the 2 of them. So the question over here, and I'll develop this, how to read a culturally different text. Given that, which comes in problematic 2, we have got used to reading certain texts and reading certain texts in certain ways. How do you read a text that is not clearly amenable, understandable to the way we would usually read and understand things? So there is one problematic over here, how to read a culturally different text, and then what would be a theory of readability over here, how would we read it? A quick journey through Girindra Shekhar Bose's life and works. I'm just trying to set him up with respect to Freud. This is 14 Parsi Bagan Lane, which is Girindra Shekhar Bose's residence, where you see this signboard, Girindra Shekhar Clinic, Psychoanalysis, Psychiatric Research, the Indian Psychoanalytic Society, the Office of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society, and that number 14 Parsi Bagan Lane. It is adjacent to Calcutta University, actually. As I enter the building, this is the corridor which takes me to the clinic where Girindra Shekhar Bose practiced his psychoanalysis, and this is the clinic, which is also the office of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society, and Dr. Sharadindu Banerjee is the president and Anup Dhar is the secretary. We can see his signboard over there, and this is 14 Parsi Bagan Lane. So on the left of the lane is the office of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society. On the right of the lane, that wall that you see is University of Calcutta, which houses the first psychology department in India, set up in 1915, and Girindra Shekhar Bose was the first student in this department, MSc student in psychology, and this is that name. Bose's life quickly he moves from medicine, completes his medicine in 1910, was interested, like Freud, in hypnosis and magic, moves to psychology in 1917, completes his psychology MSc, starts his PhD thereafter, completes his PhD in 1921, which is titled The Concept of Repression, and I'm stressing concept over here, the concept of repression, and sends this book, Concept of Repression, to Sigmund Freud, and this begins the conversation between the 2 of them. He thereafter moves to psychiatry and sets up a very complicated journey. And if I look at one day in Girindra Shekhar Bose's life, he spent the morning in Lumbini Park Psychiatry Hospital in the outdoor. His afternoons were in the Department of Psychology, where he became head of department and taught psychology. And evening, he would be in 14 Parsi Bagan Lane practicing psychoanalysis. So this would be his day. And he's actually the first who set up the first psychiatry outdoor in India, not asylum, but the first psychiatry outdoor in Carmichael College, which is now National Medical College. So in that sense, he practices psychiatry, teaches psychology, and also practices psychoanalysis. So the current division that we have is not incumbent upon him, and he moves between these 3 somewhat with difficulty, perhaps. He writes a Bengali book called Shopno or Dreams in 1928, which is actually a response to Freud's interpretation of dreams. He writes the first children's novel, Lal Kalo, Red and Black, which is a battle between red ants and black ants because a woman ant has been harassed by the red ant group. But it's a children's novel. He writes his text on the Puranas in 1934. Yoga Sutra and Patanjali's rereading of the Yoga Sutra between 34 and 48. And the final text is the Bhagavad Gita, which is a very long commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, which gets published in 1948. So this is his journey, and there are papers. I can come to that as we go along. There are other texts also. One you can see over there, Everyday Psychoanalysis, the cover page of it, which I recovered from Rukmini. These are some of his books: Concept of Repression, the Bidirectional Bose Freud Correspondence, and 1922 is the formation of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society. While the Department of Psychology was founded in 1915, the Indian Psychoanalytic Society is formed outside the academia in 1922. I have already spoken of the Lumbini Park Mental Hospital, 1939. 1947, and this is important, publication of the journal Shamiksha, and this is volume 3, number 1 of that journal. So we have created a web archive of the journal issues now. And 1959, they begin a Bengali journal on psychoanalysis called Chitto. Chitto, difficult to translate, can't call it mind, but Chitto. In 1922, Girindra Shekhar became a co-editor of the International Journal of Psychoanalysis, and his name continued to be in that list. And I discovered this in the Nimhans library, the downstairs underground library, where you get the first issues of the International Psychoanalytic Society Journal, and Bose's name appears in that journal. And Freud invited Girindra Shekhar Bose to become an editor of this journal, and this is how it begins. So this is quickly a sense of Girindra Shekhar Bose. I'll come back to my problematic one now and see how we can develop that. Given this phase, there is this exchange of letters, and I'll come to the letters, the Bose-Freud correspondence, as yet another problematic. And given this correspondence and the way the correspondence moves, one question that needs to be grappled with is, what is the gradient, the power dynamic between Freud and Bose? How does Freud receive Bose, and how does Bose try to communicate with Freud? What is it that goes on between the two of them? This is obviously not a situation of brute power or clear domination, but what I would call hegemony as I go along, and where the question of the psychic life of power becomes important, or power understood in a psychoanalytic sense, power understood as internalization, complicity, as in its surreptitious nature, as how one becomes an object carrier of the other's desire. A desire that is not spelled out, or not articulated, or not said. So in that sense, what I'm trying to push for is that to understand this dialogue and to understand the somewhat secret workings of power, power in its very subtle form, in this dialogue, one in turn needs, and this is the interesting paradox, one in turn needs a psychoanalytic understanding of power or politics. One in turn needs to understand power in its complex, nuanced, subtle, surreptitious psychoanalytic dimension. Power in its more psychic, internalized form, rather than power in its more violent, coercive, brutal form. So power in the interstices of knowledge, of the production or the dissemination or the conduction of knowledge, rather than power as a simple brute coercive force. So the point I'm trying to share in Problematic 1, and this is the one point I'll try to come back to at the end, is that this very understanding of the dialogue and the subtle dynamic of power in the dialogue requires psychoanalysis. So it's bizarre, actually, that the very understanding of the politics of psychoanalysis requires what I would call a psychoanalysis of politics of power. So in that sense, what we are trying to render intelligible requires that which is to be rendered intelligible. So the master's tools become important for the slave to make sense of the master, and this is the interesting paradox over here in this kind of what could be provisionally called a subtle master-slave dialectic, where the slave requires the master tools, or the master's tools requires psychoanalysis to make sense of the master's tool-making process. So in that sense, in other words, it raises a question for the political, or for the colonial, or for the larger cultural question within the political, that we need a dialogue perhaps between what I'm calling Marx and Foucault on the one hand and Freud on the other. So this is the point I actually try to develop, and this is the only point actually I try to develop in these 7.5 problematics. On the one hand, the subject question, Girindrasekhar Bose and Freud as subjects of psychoanalysis, and what I'm calling, building on one of Ashish Nandi's formulations, the politics of secret selves in colonial India. And the point I'm trying to share with us over here is that the Bose-Freud dialogue is not amenable to the transparency we want to assume in understanding a dialogue. So it's not a transparent dialogue. There is something psychoanalytic in this dialogue. The dialogue itself becomes a kind of psychoanalytic diet, and the dialogue takes a certain form as we go along, or perhaps all dialogues take such a form, and it requires a kind of methodological entry to make sense of that dialogue. So on the one hand, my problem as I went through this dialogue and tried to make sense of this dialogue, and I've spent many years trying to understand what's going on over here, is that this dialogue is not amenable to a transparent interpretation. There is something about secret selves in this dialogue. There is something secret, something spectral, something non-transparent in this dialogue, and that is one problem. The other side of the problem is what I'm calling the problem of hegemony, where power takes a kind of psychic life, where power takes the form of the other's desire. And I have in mind over here Lacan's graph of desire, where power is internalized in the form of the other's desire, the other's unspelt, unsaid desire, as if the slave has anticipated in the gaze of the master the desire of the master. The master hasn't spelled out desire. So in that sense, the point Lacan pushes for is that the unconscious is not inside, the unconscious is outside. The unconscious is in the other's desire, and one needs to understand how the other's desire is internalized, and this takes us to the question of the psychoanalysis of the political, or the psychoanalysis of power, when we try to understand the power or the political in psychoanalysis. And this is the problem that I'll try to develop, actually. I know for some of us at least the problem is a little less transparent now. There is a secret in the problem at present, but it's fine. Let us work with this non-comprehension a little more, and maybe we'll reach somewhere. And this takes me to that problematic of bringing Marx and Foucault, or a theory of power, or a theory of colonialism in dialogue with Freud. And the text that comes to mind is, of course, Frankfurt School, which brings Marx and Freud to dialogue, but Anti-Oedipus by Deleuze and Guattari also, who bring a kind of sophisticated Marx and a sophisticated Freud to dialogue. So it's not that we are doing it for the first time, there have been attempts. So this dialogue is what I'm trying to place within the larger orbit of culture, subjectivities, and psychoanalysis, and placing psychoanalysis within the womb of culture and subjectivities. However, the problem is that psychoanalysis is itself productive of subjectivities and cultures. So there is a double bind over here. The problem falls back on oneself. One cannot simply place psychoanalysis as a cocoon within a larger womb, or see it as a kernel within a husk called culture or psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis itself is productive of cultures and subjectivities. So this double dialectic between culture, subjectivity, and psychoanalysis. And this was our research program in Bangalore. You can see cusp hidden in culture, subjectivity, and psychoanalysis. And this is how we try to make sense of it. One word on the secret or the cryptid. I would, of course, like to call it cryptid, but I stick to Nandi's formulation over here. Secret self, he wants to distinguish it from the standard Freudian unconscious. The presumption is that the secrecy is imposed. You can, if you can't see, you can just hear. The presumption is that the secrecy is imposed, in this instance by categories associated with dominance, but is also partly internalized. As a result, the socialized self learns to keep double ledgers, and it's double ledgers that I'm stressing over here. Was Bose and Freud both maintaining double ledgers, one for public or official consumption, the other for private moments of a transmission as unofficial memories or the creation of contraband histories. Not merely individuals, but even communities, cultures have their secret or cryptid selves. So the move I've made is the move from transparency to the cryptonymic, or the cryptoanalytic, or the cryptid. Okay, so the first problematic is that the Bose-Freud dialogue is not amenable to transparency. It requires working through in the psychoanalytic sense, so as to make sense of the psychoanalytic itself. And that itself is a problem. Problematic too, and from now on things become simpler, is a simple problematic. And this was pointed out to me, and I owe it to him by my teacher, my mentor, I would say, Professor Partha Chatterjee, who said, if you have to look at this problem, you will require a metaphor of a different kind. And one evening in Bangalore, this metaphor hit me. It was offered to me by a student of mine, Siddhesh Sharma, who is not in this room, and I owe it to him. It's the fourth Da, and the Freudian fourth Da is the fourth Da in Beyond the Pleasure Principle. Freud's grandson is playing with the spool there and here, playing with the absence-presence of the mother. So the fourth Da is between the windscreen and the rear view mirror. And the fourth Da becomes acute when one is in search of new theory of mental life. Fourth Da, for me, is a limited metaphor of the predicament that marks our condition. And I'm putting our in the way Parth Chatterjee would say our modernity. Fourth Da between the windscreen, as in the metaphor of driving, and the rear view mirror represents for us the difficult task of navigation. Navigation between the windscreen view, the view of the present or the view of the immediate future, and the rear view mirror, the view of the past. Navigation between the view one gets through the windscreen, say for example cognitive science and neurobiology today, and the one gets through the rear view mirror, say the Yoga Sutras or the Bhagavad Gita. So a looking ahead and a looking behind, a vanishing past and an ever-emergent present. And this is where Bose himself was locked. And this gives us the problematic in a somewhat complex way. On the one hand is the windscreen view, which is still a kind of transparency. On the other hand, the reflected, laterally inverted image of the past through the rear view mirror. So there are two views over here, one transparent, the other reflected, and the laterally inverted one over here. So in that sense, it raises a question for us, a question I try to develop later, that the vanishing past may get reflected through Orientalism and come to Bose himself as a laterally inverted image of the past. So tradition is not simply available, or culture is not simply available. We have laterally inverted images of culture or tradition, and one needs to work through this. This, however, raises a question for us. What is the predicament? And I don't want to hurt my psychology friends in the room now. What is the fourth Da, however we are at present? It is not between the Yoga Sutra or the Bhagavad Gita and Sigmund Freud or psychoanalysis. Our current fourth Da, if I may put it a little harshly, is between an American future and a British past. Between, as if, baseball and cricket, where baseball / T20 is American and cricket is colonial. Lagan. Between American psychiatry and British ego-psychology. So contemporary psychology needs to reflect upon what is its fourth Da. Is it a fourth Da between an American future and a British past? What was Girindra Shekhar Bose's fourth Da? Was it a fourth Da? And it's a question. Between the hegemonic culture of modern Western psychology, which is the windscreen view for him, his contemporary, and the culture of what is provisionally a non-Western, non-modern psychology. So what is he getting to see? And is it in the Yoga Sutras? Is it in the Bhagavad Gita as a kind of psychological exegesis? And this is important. And my limited research, I don't know whether I can even call it research, shows me one very interesting thing. Literally between the 1920s and the 1930s, a number of people were writing commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita. One, Tilak. Two, Savarkar. Three, Gandhi. And the first paragraph of Gandhi's Bhagavad Gita is a take on Savarkar's Bhagavad Gita. Four, a Bengali sociologist who writes a take on the Bhagavad Gita. And it goes on like this. The other one is Girirendra Bose, who reads the Bhagavad Gita as a psychoanalytic text. Gandhi also, interestingly, reads the Bhagavad Gita as a psychological text. Tilak, Savarkar has a quite different understanding of the Bhagavad Gita. The other person who writes a long commentary on the Bhagavad Gita is Aurobindo. And it looks like at around this time, during the high noon of colonialism, there is a need to write, rewrite, remake, rethink the Bhagavad Gita that is getting reflected in the rear view mirror. And each one is trying to make sense of this image that one is receiving from there. Bose also enters this problematic, and the question I ask, and this is the difference, and I take off from one comment by Sudhir Thakur in one of his books, where he suggests that Indian psychology or Indian psychoanalysis was much more critical, decolonized during colonialism, and has been much more colonized after political independence. And this gives us a sense, the current Fodda we all are part of, and the Fodda Bose was part of, perhaps stands testimony to Kakar's formulation that we are perhaps more colonized than we were when we were politically not free. This took me to problematic 3, and the problematic 3 now opens up in this way. Given that we are in the Fodda between an American future and a British past, can we read Girirendra Bose, whose Fodda is a little different from our Fodda? This takes me to the question, how to read a culturally different text. So if a text is different, and this raises the question of comprehension, a problem I face when I read Tagore. I'm not so well read in Gandhi, but Tagore is a thinker I have read for some time, and there the same problem comes up: how to read him, how to understand what he's saying, how to comprehend. Is my contemporary education a hurdle to understanding or comprehending him? And is there a similar problematic with respect to Bose over here? This I have crossed, this problem. I have given you a sense of Bose's life history and works. The one text I'll try to develop today is the new theory of mental life. That's the text I want to work on. Why does it say it's a new theory of mental life? And one problem I have always had is Girirendra Bose psychoanalytic? If I write a history of Indian work on mental health, mental life, will it be a history of psychoanalysis? And when Bose says it's a new theory of mental life and not a new theory of psychoanalysis, one wonders what is it that he's trying to do. So one problem I have had: can I call this history from Bose to the present a history of psychoanalysis? Or does it require another meaning? And that is one other problematic we would have. I will come to the problematic of naming now, and this has been one other problem I have had: what to call Bose's work. Is it psychoanalysis? Is it psychoanalytic? Or is it something else? Why did he call his text a new theory of mental life and not a new theory of psychoanalysis or an other theory of psychoanalysis? Lacan writes in Seminar 17, he calls his book The Other Side of Psychoanalysis. And he writes in the book, page 2 of the book, he says, I was wondering what to call it. Should I call it psychoanalysis turned upside down? Or should I call it the other side of psychoanalysis? Over here, Lacan doesn't have ambivalence with respect to the fact that it is psychoanalysis, but from the other side, or it is turned upside down. But Bose somehow pushes for an idea or a book called A New Theory of Mental Life. And why is he calling it a new theory of mental life rather than a new theory of psychoanalysis? And that is one other problematic. 4, I take a close look at one of Jacques Derrida's texts, one of the keynote lectures he delivered at the conference of the International Psychoanalytic Society. And this text is titled Geopsychoanalysis. And it's interesting. He's putting it as geopsychoanalysis, and is speaking about the map of psychoanalysis. In other words, the geograph of psychoanalysis. And he's looking at the map of psychoanalysis, and I don't have the time to get into that text. And in this text, he's trying to show how psychoanalysis or the psychoanalytic imagination gets reduced to the American imagination, and how even Europe gets purged out of the psychoanalytic imagination. And this is a lecture, a keynote he is delivering to the International Psychoanalytic Association. He's delivering it to the IPA, okay? And he's saying your psychoanalytic map or imagination is limited to the American. It has even lost touch with the European. Forget the Asian or the Oriental. However, in the same text, Derrida suggests, and I quote him, there is practically no psychoanalysis in Asia or in the South Seas. And I take his statement as the problem. Why does he say this? And we have just seen pictures of 14 Parsibagan Lane. We have just seen all of Bose's books. And having seen all that, when Derrida says there is practically no psychoanalysis in Asia or in the Southern Seas, what does he mean? Why does he say this? And is Derrida right or is he wrong? Or it's neither. Derrida's piece is called Geopsychoanalysis and the Rest of the World, and in this piece he's trying to make space for the rest of the world in a geographical sense. He wants to bring back Latin America into the map of psychoanalysis. He wants to bring back Argentina. He wants to bring back Europe. He wants to bring back Israel into the map of psychoanalysis, perhaps Asia as well. However, in the same text, he suggests, when he is trying to understand the rest of the world, he suggests there is practically no psychoanalysis in Asia or in the South Seas. And he puts forward 2 suggestions. 1, is it because psychoanalysis has never set foot on Asian soil? Clearly, that's not true. And we have seen it. The second suggestion is interesting, and it relates to my 4th Da between the windscreen and the rear view mirror. Is it because here psychoanalysis has never taken off its European shoes? Is it because African or Asian psychoanalysis was European, structurally defined in the profoundest way by the colonial state apparatus? Is it because much of Asian or African psychoanalysis were merely emanations of what we used to call metropolitan organizations? So this is the problematic he raises, that yes, you have psychoanalysis, but you haven't taken off European shoes. However, the question that one can ask Derrida over here is, Derrida, however, could have put to examination the nature of the shoe, or the nature of the foot, or the shoe-foot relation. His position was that psychoanalysis in Asia or Africa means Fanon and Bose did not take off its European shoes. One could have found out whether the foot did manage to walk barefoot, even if for a while, or whether the foot did manage to fashion some other footwear other than the European one. Between barefoot walking and walking with exclusively European footwear, there are a number of intermediate possibilities, in between possibilities that are not exactly midpoints. So this is the problem I take up over here and ask, did Girindra Shekhar Bose figure out other kinds of footwear and was not simply using European footwear or Freudian footwear in his work on psychoanalysis? This is the problematic. And I go to the text, the concept of repression. The concept of repression gives one the feeling that Bose is operating within a Freudian understanding of mental life. He's talking of repression, etc. And he's taking the repressive hypothesis as fundamental to his work. The question to me was it an independent work? Was Bose arriving at certain concepts of repression on his own? And I don't want to overemphasize this. What is important to me is not the independence of the arrival, that he arrived at the concept of repression independent of psychoanalysis, which is the usual recuperation route. We want to say, oh, we also had Vedic mathematics, we also had metallurgy, we also had it. So Bose also had psychoanalytic insights. I am not trying to make a case, oh, we had it, we also had it. Rather, the point that I'm trying to push for is we had it differently. The important point for me over here was his concept and conception of repression different from the one Freud propounded? Was it different from the repressive hypothesis Foucault critiques in History of Sexuality, Volume 1? That's the problem. Was it different? And the naming of the book is interesting over here. Bose could have written a book on repression. He writes a book on the concept of repression. He problematizes repression rather than documenting repression or repressive hypothesis. And that's the catch over here that needs to be worked upon. This raises another problematic, for me, problematic 5, which is the deeper work of hegemony, how the work of presencing and absencing happens. How a certain work can get presenced and Freud's repressive hypothesis gets over-presenced and Bose's concept of repression gets absenced. And this happens primarily because we see modern psychology as a kind of pinnacle of a step ladder, which I'll come to, but the position I'm taking is that modern psychology is no less an ethno-psychology than what has come to be known as primitive, traditional, local or folk psychology. So one needs to, which is what I'll develop down the line, one needs to provincialize perhaps modern psychology, put it in context, particularize it, limit its idioms of the imperial, and that is the work. This happens primarily because we tend to see the history of psychology or psychoanalysis in this form, a kind of a step ladder where at one point of time we had Indian, Chinese, Egyptian, Arabic, but finally it is the Greco-Roman and then medieval and then modern, and that's the journey. So there are things we will leave behind and then create an axis between Athens, London, Paris, and those would then become the way of understanding psychology or psychoanalysis. And the problematic that opens up over here, one is to see Freud as the pinnacle of this step ladder and have figures that were slowly chiseled out. Jung, Adler, Ferenczi, Karen Horney. And put Bose in that long list. So the move I'm making over here is to make psychoanalytic thinking not a step ladder, but a kind of coterminous nodal points that move in different directions. So I'm putting Freud, Jung, Adler, Ferenczi, Horney, and Bose as a continuum rather than a step ladder. And that would perhaps open the space for a reading of Bose. Otherwise, it would always look like, and which is why Bose becomes historical. Which is why in a psychology department or a psychology course, we would not teach Bose. Just like we would not take too much time teaching Ferenczi. Quite a Karen Horney to never. We would never teach her. Okay. But very interestingly, these four figures are, if I may risk the term, are expelled figures in psychoanalysis. And we will always tend to put them as historical figures, as not somebody who we would need to read now, but would read only in the history of psychology chapter, but not read them in the philosophy of psychology chapter. So this is the problematic. The next problematic I try to open up over here, and quickly, I won't spend much time on this. How was Bose trying to develop his new theory of mental life? And this takes me back to the windscreen rear view problem. Was it, and this is just a question I'm leaving us with, was it a dual or a double critique or a bidirectional critique? Critique of what he was receiving from Freud or from Europe, and critique of what he was receiving as Indian or as Hindu at that time. What was being invented, and I'm saying invented, not discovered, what was being invented as the Indian tradition or as Hindu tradition. So this is one question. So in his attempts at speaking his mother tongue as against a foreign idiom, was he inaugurating a bidirectional critique? A critique of the Occident and what was made of the Orient by the Occident. And that's the catch. That the Orient is a reflected gaze, and the Occident would do much to create and recreate an Orient. And I'm remembering Wang Hui, a Chinese Marxist philosopher's work called The Idea of Asia book, where he tries to show painstakingly through a genealogy of the idea of Asia, how the very idea of Asia was generated during the high noon of colonialism. So in that sense, this is one question that remains. So do his readings of the Yoga Sutra and the Bhagavad Gita stand testimony to such a bidirectional critique? Is it a bidirectional critique? Is it at all one? It takes me then to three questions Spivak raises in a not too well-read piece called Psychoanalysis in the Left Field and Field Working. This is a piece on psychoanalysis and baseball. And in this piece, Spivak uses the metaphor of baseball to show Girinder Shekhar Bose in the left field, out in the left field. Left field in baseball, as far as I have understood it, I may be a little off the mark over here, looks to be the field farthest from where the hitter and pitcher is. So she's trying to understand Bose's psychoanalysis as psychoanalysis out in the left field. And the question she asks, was Bose's questions, three questions, was it stemming from the realization that we cannot perform conventions laid down according to Hebrew, Hellenic or Christian stories, the Judaic, Greek or Christian stories? One. Question one she raises, or do we need other stories to think psychoanalysis? Two, is the parricide story the beginning of human history? 3. Does not Freud foreclose possibilities of looking at a different rather than a deviant language game by relegating matrilineal polytheisms or pagan polymorphisms to the prehistory of humankind, or by making Islam an abbreviated repetition of the Jewish religion? This is the third question is a strong question actually. She's trying to make a case for an imagination of psychoanalysis beyond the Judaic. And how would you do that? The problem then is not just of universalism. The problem is deeper, and non-critical cultural relativism is not the antidote to universalism. I have to work on this a little bit for 5 minutes, how I mark this distinction, because this then gives us a way of reading the Bose-Freud correspondence, and we will see the play of the universal and the particular in the correspondence. On the one hand, we have the universal. So, the Freudian universal. Phallus, castration, Oedipus complex. On the other hand, what we are calling over here non-critical cultural relativism. And what is that? Let us look at what is non-critical cultural relativism. What do we mean by that? We can skip this one. The only thing that I need to share with you over here, I'm quoting Spivak over here, cultural relativism makes of the various Asias and Africas a colorful cluster of national origins, okay? And where a kind of cross-cultural psychology or humanistic psychology may find a ground. It's still not clear what she means by this. Such relativism was originally a response to the indiscriminate universalism that mirrored the parochial cultures in which social sciences had grown in Europe. And it was supposed to correct the bias of the first generation social scientists, often Christian missionaries and colonial bureaucrats. What does this do? And my last 3-4 lines are enough actually. What we do over here in non-critical cultural relativism is that we keep the universal and we say we are a version of the universal. We are not exactly the universal, but a version of it. So there is a certain particularism which the relativism invokes and fights and uses to fight the universal. However, what happens over here is that on the one hand, we see something as a transcultural reservoir of knowledge. And on the other hand, we have handicapped cohorts, locals, particulars, Girindra Shekhar Bose, waiting to be interpreted and integrated within the transcultural reservoir. But integrated in a very interesting way. Integrated in the way that it is different. Yes, it is different. It is a little different. And this is the power of the universal. The universal doesn't survive because it remains rigidly universal. And this is the question of the hegemonic as well. The universal survives because it says, yes, I can change a little as I go elsewhere. And that is the beauty of the work of the universal. And what happens over here, so my last 3 lines are enough. The other psychologies, whatever is happening elsewhere, thus become definitionally mixed bags of good and bad insights, good and bad data. The good in them are to be swallowed, the bad rejected. But the question is, who would swallow, who would reject? And that becomes important when we try to understand Bose and the relationship he marked with Sigmund Freud. So in that sense, take it a little deeper. The implication then of seeing non-modern or non-Western psychologies as sacks of isolated insights or data is that these insights or data can then be used to ornament, strengthen, or alter the micro-theories of modern psychology. The basic paradigm and culture of modern psychology, however, remain untouched and are in fact carefully adapted to new empirical facts. And this is Professor Ashish Gandhi's line from the Politics of Psychology piece, his lament: what changes over time are the micro-theories, not the architectonics of modern psychology. So what we do is that we say, well, fine, the universal holds, the universal needs to change a little bit when it comes to India, and the universal takes this form, U1, U2, U3, U4, U5, as it travels from Europe eastward or westward. But that keeps the universal intact in a very, very interesting way. That the universal survives in difference. It doesn't survive in its rigid universality. And that's the beauty of the survival of the universal. So what happens is that we change micro-theories as it goes along, but we never question the basic paradigm or architectonics of psychology. And the question over here to us is the research problematic. Was Bose one more micro-theory? Or was he questioning the basic paradigm or architectonics of Freudian psychoanalysis? Was Bose questioning the repressive hypothesis itself? Or was he only saying repression occurs in Indian patients in a little different way, in a way that is little different? And this is where I want to go, and I've shared this with you. So does he inaugurate in the process a new theory of mental life? The question or the tension over here is, how would Freud receive him? So I've created the condition for reading the Bose-Freud correspondence now. And this is problematic 6. There's only 2 left now. And problematic 6 is about the Bose-Freud correspondence, which can be read as an other psychoanalytic diary itself. So the reading of Bose-Freud correspondence could also have in itself a psychoanalytic reading. So a reading of 2 psychoanalysts, but a psychoanalytic reading of the 2 analysts. It's a possibility. The Bose-Freud correspondence, and you need not bother to read all of it. I'll share some parts, but I wanted to put them up so that they are there before us. As Bose sends the first book from the southern hemisphere, perhaps, on psychoanalysis, called The Concept of Repression, his PhD, Freud writes, "It was great pleasure and a pleasant surprise," I don't know why it's a pleasant surprise, that the first book on a psychoanalytic subject, which came to us from that part of the world, from the rest of the world, as Derrida says, should display so good a knowledge of psychoanalysis, so deep an insight into its difficulties, and so much of deep-going original thought. Dr. Bose has singled out the concept of repression for his inquiry, so he got it actually. And in treating this theoretical matter has provided us with precious suggestions. He is aiming at a philosophical evolution and elaboration of our crude, practical, clinical concepts. And I can wish psychoanalysis should soon reach up to that level to which he strives to raise it. Okay. So there is a little bit of goodness and a little bit of surprise. 1922, when the letter meets his name. It's complex, actually. So Freud is also suggesting that maybe you will give our crude practical concepts a deep-seated philosophical elaboration, which perhaps we are not managing over here. But on the other hand, there is a pleasant surprise, great and pleasant surprise. Bose writes, and I jump a few letters actually, because I want to mark the moment of difference, not the entire correspondence. And Bose is now as if trying to push for it. A number of letters have happened in 1929 now. Okay? So 7 years have passed, and is now pushing for the point. I would draw your particular attention to my work on Oedipus' Wish, where I have ventured to differ from you in some respects. Okay? He is now trying to say, come on, please take note where I have differed with you. I enclose a Bengali book on dreams, which I have just published, Shopno, Book of Dreams. Please accept the book as a token of my deepest regards for the father of psychoanalysis. And Salman Akhtar now says he should not be called the father of psychoanalysis anymore. Freud writes, quick response, 31st January 1929, and it's not a mail, it's a handwritten letter. It's reached Girinder Shekhar Bose, 9th of March, 1929. You directed my attention on the Oedipus Wish. In fact, I am not convinced by your arguments. Your theory of the opposite wish appears to me to stress rather a formal element than a dynamic factor. I still think you underrate the efficiency of the castration fear. I never denied the connection of the castration wish with the wish to be female, nor that of the fear with the horror of becoming a female. But I confess I am by no means more convinced of the validity of my own assumptions. And he's saying assumptions. We have not yet seen through this intricate Oedipus matter. We need more observations. So it's quite a balanced response from Freud, but Freud also marks the difference very sharply that I'm not going to go this way. Bose writes, quite quick again, 4th of April 1929. Bose's letter has reached Freud. Of course, I do not expect that you would accept offhand my reading of the Oedipus situation. I do not deny the importance of the castration threat in European cases. My argument is that the threat owes its efficiency to its connection with the wish to be female. The real struggle lies between the desire to be a male and its opposite, the desire to be a female. The Oedipus mother is a combined parental image, and I have reasons to believe that much of the motivation of the maternal deity is traceable to this source. My theory of the opposite wish is not a mere formal philosophical statement as you suppose it to be. The theory of opposite wish will explain the occurrence in pairs in the same individual of such traits as sadism and masochism, observationism and exhibitionism. I don't have the time to get into it, but Bose actually attached a number of case histories where he tried to show the seesaw between the double, or how a spectral double haunts a wish. So the other creating a kind of insecure hauntology in the psyche of the patient rather than a secure ontology. of castration anxiety and penis envy. So, which is a kind of a secure ontology premised on a part object called the phallus. But Bose is trying to work through a kind of insecure, what I could call a ontology of a spectral double wish, rather than a secure ontology of having or not having the phallus. And I'll come to this. The theory, and it goes on, which is not very important. What is important is the last 4 words, where Bose turns his attention to language, and says that, so it's a very interesting anticipation of what Lacan tries to develop much later, from 1956 onwards, in his Rome seminar, the Rome talk, where he suggests the function and field of speech and language in psychoanalysis, which is taken as the linguistic turn in psychoanalysis, but Bose actually develops it, and I'm not trying to make it a nationalist question, that Bose did it before Lacan. That's not so important for me, actually. But what is important is that his attention to language is important over here. And what he calls, obviously, he would not say language in the way we would now say language. He says grammatical forms of speech. So the ambivalence and I'll share 2 statements with you. The ambivalence in 2 statements Lacan foregrounds in his seminars, statements like "I cannot but love you." So it's a I can not but. First affirmation, a second negation, and a third negation, or a first negation and a second negation. So statements like "I cannot but love you" in the patient's speech in the analytic setting, or statements like, and I'm quoting Lacan over here, "I do not find my friend's wife unattractive." The work of the "un" over here. In that sense, this is what Bose was attending at, actually, the importance of the grammatical forms of speech and language, and that is how he would write his. He was a firm believer that everything that the patient says or the analysand says has to be written down. Not a word can be missed. So he would crazily write, and he was completely opposed to later traditions in psychoanalysis in Bengal, where analysts stopped writing. They would write their notes after the session, but then he said, then you're missing out on the real play of language in the session. Freud's response comes, and I won't cross 1929. It's all between Jan and May. Freud's response comes quickly, and this is important. "I'm fully impressed by the difference in castration reaction." Freud reads Bose's case histories and response. "I'm fully impressed by the difference in castration reaction between Indian and European patients, and promise to keep my attention fixed on the problem of the opposite wish which you accentuate. I wonder," and the big man sees it right, "what the relation of the opposite wish to the phenomenon of ambivalence may be. And ambivalence is not developed in psychoanalysis well enough up to a certain point." And this is 1929, when Bose is pushing for a theory of ambivalence. And this volume I brought because it has Bose's paper on ambivalence. A long tract, a very long paper, and I would have loved to just speak on that paper, where he starts with Luer, moves through Freud, Adler, Ferenczi, Jung, and comes to his theory of ambivalence and shows how he differs with each on the theorization of ambivalence, and how psychoanalysis cannot have a good theory of ambivalence, why it cannot have a good theory of ambivalence, and he goes on. But mark Freud's term, what has he done? This is what I called non-critical cultural relativism. Here is Freud's relativism. I am fully impressed by the difference in castration reaction between Indian and European patients. Indian and European patients are different. They have different reactions. Psychoanalysis would need a slight tweaking in Indian conditions. It would be tropical psychoanalysis, like tropical medicine. So medicine is medicine, but when we encounter mosquitoes and malaria and Plasmodium vivax in the tropics, they give birth to a local medicine called tropical medicine, and the department still exists in Calcutta Medical College. Grant the devil her due, grant Girindra Shekhar cultural relativism, and hold on in the process to the universal. Here is Freud's attempt at holding on to psychoanalysis as a transcultural reservoir of knowledge. In this structure, Girindra Shekhar's psychology becomes definitionally a mixed bag of good and bad insights. The good are to be swallowed, the bad rejected. So you have told me something interesting about Indian patients, and the castration reaction doesn't work in the Indian patients in a similar way, but my theory holds. My theory, the universality of the theory holds in difference. And that's the curious work of the hegemonic. And that's my connection with problematic one. And it goes on, so the last line is important. So what happens is that the basic paradigms and culture of modern Western psychoanalysis remain untouched, and in fact are carefully adapted to new empirical findings. What changes over time are the micro-theories in distant locations elsewhere, not the architectonics of Freudian psychoanalysis. So that's a connection I have made now. And Freud responds further thereafter and suggests that the theory of opposite wishes strikes me as something less dynamic and than morphological. It appears to me to flat, so to say. It seems to lack a third dimension, etc. I will not have the time to get into the third dimension in Girindra Shekhar's Bose work. How Bose, while in Lacan the third dimension is the father, so the first and the second dimension are the mother and the child, mother and the infant. So the mother, child died. The father, the symbolic father, the name of the father with the taboo function, the father who institutes the law, is the third dimension. So there is a secure third dimension in Freudian psychoanalysis, and Freud is looking for that third dimension over here in totem and taboo and in much of Lacanian psychoanalysis. But in Bose, the third dimension is evanescent, contingent upon what emerges contingently out of the two. So the third dimension is ever vanishing. There is no secure third dimension in Bose. But this is where Freud builds on it. And however, where Freud grounds him is we did neglect the fact of the existence of opposite wishes from the three sources of bisexuality: male-female, ambivalence, love-hate, and the opposition of active-passive. So Freud actually grants Bose an area. And these phenomena have to be worked into our system to make us see what modifications or corrections are necessary and how far we can work with your ideas. So it's an interesting relationship. Bose replies, and this is where I'll end our discussion on the correspondence. And this is the basic question he raises for the repressive hypothesis in Freudian psychoanalysis. And this, according to me, and I may be wrong over here, is a theory of interiority. And the way I'm putting it is this: while Lacan develops a sophisticated theory of exteriority, where he sees the unconscious as outside, as the other's discourse, Freud works between interiority and exteriority. Case histories, totem and taboo, civilization and its discontents. Bose tries to develop a sophisticated theory of interiority, and Bose may be wrong. However, the way he puts it is this. According to Freud, shame, hatred, and fear represses our wish, and unconscious feelings like love, violence, jealousy can influence us without our knowledge. But I think in the unconscious, only wishes exist. In fact, and this is his difference with Freud, shame, and Rick has asked this question many a times after we have discussed totem and taboo, that how did the taboo get instituted? In fact, shame and fear is the result of particular repressed wishes. They are not the cause of repression. And this is where he marks his difference. He says we will need a theory of why the taboo got interiorized, rather than say the taboo was the cause of repression. The taboo is the effect of repression, rather than the cause of repression. And this is concept of repression. And he's asking this question, that how in psychoanalysis will we explain repression rather than assume repression? And the route he takes is the opposite wish. And just hold on to the last line in his letter. I venture to submit that the theory of opposite wish throws new light into the mysterious ways of the human mind, and he is pushing for his idea. I will not get into this because now I'm running out of time. There is one other Bose over here. Bose is also not an uniform kind of transparency. Don't bother to read this so much. He also tries to relate psychoanalysis to the resolving of grief, or what he calls adyantik dukkha, ultimate liberation being moksha. And the difference he marks over here in terms of cure is a one-liner actually. In the West, in a thorn-ridden society, one could try to uproot the thorns. The other is to think of a pair of shoes which will protect you from thorns. So he saw psychoanalysis, or the self of psychology, or self-psychology, or his theory of mental life, his understanding of psychoanalytic cure as a shoe, not uprooting of social thorns. So in the psychosocial diet, he clearly takes the more psychological, interiorized route, rather than the psychosocial route, interestingly. Well, Lacan takes a more discursive social formulation. Freud actually is the more balanced between the two, who actually manages the psychosocial perhaps better. But this is how Bose tries to put it. Let me end with a few questions now, and they are just questions. One, what happens then when psychoanalysis and India come close? When Freud and Bose come close? What happens to psychoanalysis when it is played out in the left field, far off from the metropolis? And the important question over here is, and let us remember what Freud tried to do to Bose's new theory of mental life. Indian and European patients are different. Does India become the analyzer and provide to Freudian psychoanalysis case material about the Aboriginal world? Or does India change the architectonics of Freudian psychoanalysis? So what was the nature of Aboriginal psychoanalysis? So that is the question, and I take the question, skip this, let's come to this. What was Bose doing? Was it Indian psychoanalysis? In which sense was it Indian? And this is the distinction I'm marking with Freud also. Was it the Indian logic of the psyche, or was it the logic of the Indian psyche? Freud would want Bose to offer or provide the logic of the Indian psyche. Well, your Indian patients are a little different and retain the universal. Whereas Bose is perhaps pushing for a logic of the psyche, a new theory of mental life, where he wants to explain repression rather than assume it as a hypothesis. Taking off from the extant logic of the Indian psyche, as exemplified in epic manuscripts like the Mahabharata as against Greek tragedy or the Bhagavad Gita, the text each one develops between the 1920s and the 1930s. Was it offering to the West the Indian logic of the psyche and not just the logic of the Indian psyche? So it's not the particular, but it's questioning the universal or the paradigm or architectonics of Freudian psychoanalysis. I go through this quickly, and I have done this already, so I need not be too intense over here. Possibility one is the universal traveling and making its way through the pores. Don't bother to read it. Possibility two, and I've done it already, which is cultural relativism, non-critical cultural relativism, displaced universals. U1, U2, an Indian version of the universal with a superscript Indian. And that would come like this. We have an Indian version of the Oedipus complex. Our bodies, our psyches, our myths are different. We have the Ganesha complex. Here the son does not kill the father. Here the father castrates the son. And we can develop that and say, well, ours is a little different, and it goes on a little differently. And this can be seen in two ways. One, we can rejoice in this displacement, that we are different. Two, one can also see as the secret or the hidden hegemony of the universal, that the universal is retained in its displacement. Yes, it's modernity, it's our modernity, but modernity nevertheless. The other question that one may ask over here, and which is not a displaced universal, what if castration complex is not the constitutive node or anchor of human psychic life? What if the phallus is not the fundamental signifier of the graph of desire? Hence, having or not having it is not what determines the psyche. Does the text of the human psyche take a peculiar turn when one takes the Bhagavad Gita as against the Sophoclean theatre as the manuscript of human culture? What if one builds on the transcript of the Kurukshetra? What is the configuration of the psychic that gets scripted in the Mahabharata? Can it usher in and inaugurate the thinking of an other psychology? A psychology different from what the West could think of, given its obsession with Greek tragedy. What if Bose, and this is my little difference with Ashish Dhar over here, a loving difference, but I could only think of this difference because he wrote Savage Freud. What if Bose was not a savage Freud? Can we provincialize the universal? Freud is one particular, Bose is another. The Bose-Freud correspondence is a dialogue between P1 and P2 rather than U1 and U2. This takes me to the genealogies of Aboriginalization, what I have called genealogies of Aboriginalization. A quick journey through it. One can then think of three structures of Aboriginalization. One, a deeply conservative one. 19th century Aboriginalization of non-Western cultures during the colonial era. And the consequent degrading, devaluing of these cultures The first is about Orientalism, both white and brown. So you see other cultures as aboriginal cultures. The second, a complex philosophical exegesis opened up by post-structuralist philosophy, as in Michel Foucault or in Jacques Derrida, is to render the original or the origin genealogical. So you look at repression or the repressive hypothesis and mark it through the Christian millennium and show how the repressive hypothesis came to haunt Freudian psychoanalysis. So you give the genealogical origin of the original, or in a more Derridian fashion, you put under erasure the origin. And two very interesting strategies of problematizing the origin or the original, and I go by these two traditions, but this renders Freudian psychoanalysis what I have called aboriginal, a tentative formulation with a hyphen between ab and origin. The third is about a possible post-Orientalist episteme, and it's not an easy task. While the first was about how knowledge of cultures were made and unmade, so 19th century anthropology and aboriginalization as a knowledge of cultures. The third, what I'm calling the post-Orientalist episteme, is about cultures of knowledge, as against Orientalist knowledge of cultures. The third is about creating cultures of aboriginalization, as against aboriginalization of cultures. So the third is not just about making micro changes in Western theories, keeping its architectonics intact, but about aboriginalizing its very architecture. So the three meanings of aboriginalization over here: 19th century aboriginalization, French post-structuralist philosophy, Foucault's genealogical and Derrida's putting under erasure the original, and the third, Bidirectional Bose, possibly creating cultures of aboriginalization as against aboriginalization of cultures. And this opens up then the three possibilities over here: the Freudian original, cultural relativism, aboriginal psychoanalysis, and third, an aboriginal theory of mental life. The third I cannot quickly call psychoanalysis, and that's the trouble. That's the problem. I had done problematic 6. This is called problematic 6. And this is one area one will have to enter quickly, because without this, I have a feeling the aboriginal theory of mental life or the new theory of mental life cannot be understood. A quick 5-minute journey through problematic 7, actually, which I am calling problematic 6. Here I am reading for just 5 minutes, and I know it's a little renegade to do this. Psychoanalysis not as a philosophy of the unconscious, and I would have wanted Rachna to be here because I owe a lot to her in this kind of thinking. Psychoanalysis as a philosophy of sexuation. Psychoanalysis as a philosophy of how we unconsciously come to become male-bodied or female-bodied. Jacques Lacan in Seminar 11 foregrounds 4 fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis: unconscious, repetition, transference, and drive. And we know all this. I argue for a 5th fundamental concept, sexuation. How the concept of sexuation has taken shape in Freud and Lacan. How has it taken shape in feminist psychoanalytic and psychoanalytic feminist work? What form did it take shape in Bidirectional Bose is the question. Did he think of sexuation? Sexuation is not sex. Sexuation is not gender. Sexuation is not the sex-gender system as in feminism. Sexuation is the unconscious of the sex-gender system. And how this happens. And quickly put, it is this. Sexuation in Freud's work is about having or not having a culturally privileged part object, the penis. In Lacan's work, it is about having or being an imaginary object, the phallus. So Lacan sees men as having the phallus in an imaginary dimension, not a real penis, and women as being the phallus for men. For post-Lacanians, it is about the position one occupies in reference to the masculine all of knowledge or the feminine not all of knowledge, not needed today. In Irigaray work, French feminist, post-structuralist, it is about an ethic of sexual difference, how man and woman are different rather than complementary. In Bose's work, sexuation is about the Mobius of sexual ambivalence, the dialectic between the wish to be male and the wish to be female, and not finding a secure sexed ontology. And that is where psychoanalysis works. The body is not securely sexed. And this insecure, vulnerable, sexuated ontology of the body, in its intimate imbrications with an equally vulnerable sexuated other. And I have tried to see the psychoanalytic dyad as a sexuated, coupled dyad. And that is where Bose tries to develop the phallus, Oedipus complex, and castration are not paradigmatic for Bose. Bose's aboriginalization of Freudian psychoanalysis through the invocation of gender, ambivalence, double wish, psychic seesaw, identification rather than introjection or projection being important. And the Oedipus point as against Oedipus complex as fundamental concepts, and the questioning of the very deployment of the phallus and castration complex as a constitutive node, anchor of psyche. I end with problematic one. Encore yet again. Where does it take us then? We started with Bose, his journey. We saw how Bose sets up a relationship, and I don't want to call it an encounter, with Freud. We saw how that relationship of encounter is itself like a psychoanalytic dyad, marked by the very subtle, surreptitious play of what could be called a psychoanalysis of power. And to understand the power or the political in psychoanalysis between Bose and Freud, Freud and Bose, one needed a good understanding, a good theory of the microtectonics of power, what I have provisionally called hegemony. And as the other's desire, or the unconscious as other's desire, takes shape, and the work of resistance takes shape between Bose and Freud, not political resistance, but psychoanalytic resistance, one needs to understand the Bose-Freud dialogue, or what could be called Anuraga dialectic, not a dialogue, not a simple transparency called dialogue. A relationship that requires, on the one hand, an understanding of power in psychoanalysis, provisionally rephrased in this discussion as politics of psychoanalysis. It is also an admission that there is politics of power in psychoanalysis, in its history, in its philosophy, in its clinical practice. But to understand that politics of psychoanalysis, one perhaps needs a sophisticated, nuanced understanding of power. I have provisionally rephrased it as the psychoanalysis of power, or the psychoanalysis of politics. And one way of putting it is this, is the two meanings of resistance. Political resistance and psychoanalytic resistance. Or the two meanings of defense, political defense and psychoanalytic defense. Or the two meanings of drive, political drive and psychoanalytic drive. And in that sense, what one needs is an understanding of both what I have called, I have repeated the slide in this form, politics of psychoanalysis in the work of the secret selves, the work of the secret, and what I've called down below, the psychoanalysis of politics, the work of hegemony. This takes me, and I'm going to lose many in the last slide, but it is a risk worth taking. How to understand then the relationship between the hegemonic and the subject? Because that is what is needed to understand the Bose-Freud dialogue or the dialectic. One perhaps needs an understanding of the hegemonic with a theory of the secret or the cryptid. And that is Derrida's book, Cryptonymy. Building on two Hungarian psychoanalysts, Nicholas Abraham and Mary Torok. Lacan was his neighbor. Derrida went elsewhere to find a theory of psychoanalysis. And the cryptid, the work of the crypt, the cryptid, or the cryptonymic, the name that is cryptid, the word that is cryptid, the work that is cryptid, is one interesting understanding of the hegemonic. And that is one angle that perhaps psychoanalysis also throws up a rethinking of the political or of power in its very sophisticated form called the hegemonic. And one requires an understanding of the psychic life of power, or what Butler calls unconscious passionate attachment. And in that sense, a very look at the politics of psychoanalysis falls back on us that you cannot understand politics, perhaps, without a psychoanalysis of politics. And a simple colonial theory of the Bose-Freud correspondence also falls on its place because of this. That a simple political theory of the Bose-Freud correspondence misses out on the curious or strange workings of the psychoanalytic. So in that sense, I cannot read the Bose-Freud correspondence only through psychoanalysis as a psychoanalytic diet, or simply as a post-colonial diet. And that problem remains. Interestingly, this dialogue offers something interesting to social theory or political theory, that the psychoanalytic diet and the post-colonial diet needs to be in conversation. A theory of the political needs the psychic, and a theory of the psychic needs a sophisticated or a nuanced understanding of power. And in that sense, I have tried in the Bose-Freud dialogue to mark a connection between not just Freud and Bose, Vienna and Calcutta, but between the psychic, the psychoanalytic, and power, or the political. Thank you.
I cannot but love you. I mean, most of you are from the university, and some of you are not. But I cannot begin to tell you how much pleasure it gives me to hear such a lecture, a well-argued, coherent lecture which makes sense from the beginning to the end, and which tells me something something new, and remarkably new. This the bringing together of psychoanalysis and politics, something which is maybe in its own way an opposite wish. It is quite interesting because one never gets to hear this in any international forums. They are subjects which, for once, may be repressed. The politics of psychoanalysis is never discussed, and maybe this is the one way in which we stand out in India, that we are always willing to discuss it, much to the frustration and consternation sometimes of other people. But this, I think, is a very, very valuable contribution to this subject. When Anup, I remember as I was coming in, I got a call and I said, I'm going to put on my shoes today and go. Usually, working long hours, I don't wear leather shoes. While hearing Anup's lecture, I was wondering, why did I put on my shoes today? Was it because of psychoanalysis, or being with psychoanalysts, or being in a gathering? I suspect it had something to do with the European shoe having to be worn. And I saw Anup in his red kurta, and I was reminded of another friend of mine, Venu. And I saw him coming out of a session once wearing kolhapuri chappals and chudidar pajama and kurta. I said, where have you been? He said, I was taking a session. I said, you were taking a session in a kurta? He said, in all the 24 volumes that Freud wrote, he has never mentioned that you cannot take a session in a kurta. So, why should I not take a session in a kurta? But, jokes aside, I have not had the courage to read all the various authors that Anup has consulted in any great depth. Whether Lacan, I have not had the courage to go beyond one short volume. Derrida or Shekhar Bose, and Spivak's definitely gives me the chills. But listening to Anup, I felt that, hey, why did I not? These guys are talking such simple stuff. No, I should have read them. What an idiot I am. And that is the hallmark of a great speaker. He understands, digests, and puts across to you people who are remarkably dense. And this is the great facility that Anup has. But what I think most of you don't realize is the great amount of hard work that Anup puts into this digestive process. Because I never ever am able to access him in the morning. If I call him late at night, anytime. He's awake, he's doing something, he's writing something, he's reading something, and so on. There are a number of points in this which are of great interest and of political value as well. One is, of course, about the geographical model, which is followed by not only psychoanalysis, but also by psychiatry. For example, if you look at the classification system in psychiatry called DSM, it's entirely geographical. Because it says that disorders which are occurring in India are culture-specific syndromes, but it doesn't stop at that. It's a disorder happening in the hand, it's a hand disorder. If it's a disorder happening in your stomach, it's a stomach disorder, and so on and so forth. We have 9 different kinds of anxiety. You should be, worried, anxious to know. And they're anxiety, but there are 9 different kinds. We can classify your anxiety into 9 different kinds. But that is the same geographical model which has been operating by seeing things as being geographically slightly different but universal, as Anup pointed out. There were number of thoughts that I had, but I don't want to, hog the time with my thoughts. I would rather leave the space open for your thoughts, your questions and comments. And while the man is here, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Any thoughts, any comments, please go ahead.
Psychoanalysis, what Freud did to Bose. Yeah. So I think the question of the major and the minor still needs to be addressed. Every center has a margin, every margin becomes a center. So I think at this point of time, to just leave it at Bose and Freud would be missing out something. I think Bose's entire work, of which of course I can't claim to have read as closely as you have, he is reading Hindu India. Okay, he does not read anything else than Hindu India, and his reading of Hindu India is from an upper caste perspective. All people, all religions, all societies in India which do not fall within the rubric of the Hindu India are missed out by Bose, and very correct. At his point of time, I think, because there is also the quest of the Indian identity which is at its height, this is what he needs to do and this is what he does. But I think as scholars of Bose, I would invite you to take me through, would it not something be left for us which is unstated if we don't see through a critical lens, the minor major question again in Bose, or the margin and the center and then the creation of another margin. That is one I would like to bring up. The second that I would like to say is that see from Bose onwards to Pakkar to all written texts which come from the Indian part of it, we like to celebrate a lot of the maternal feminine, and we like to talk, and this is a discussion we've had many times before also, and we like to talk a lot about the fact that ambivalence is more celebrated in our society. The male identity is not as rigidly as formulated as in the Western counterpart. The wish to be female is that. But again, I wonder, in the kind of problematics that the East is also in, where the political has to be rethought of, where violence has to be rethought of, where power has to be rethought of, I wonder whether it is enough for us to go by the maternal feminine. Yeah, so I'd like to your comments to both of these.
Yes, sure. You can just sit down. Okay.
You're taking 3 questions.
I think it's a big one.
I would actually agree with you. And it's good that you have raised it. Because see, in an attempt or an effort to make a space for X, we sometimes miss out on how that very X, say, purged out or chiseled out or excluded Y, Z, M, N, O, P. That's always a possibility. So it is something one will have to reflect on. I did not get into that over here. That is one. The second is, yes, I was also a person once upon a time when I would be suspicious of any reading of the Bhagavad Gita. My Marxist, full-time activist past, my rear view mirror. And there would be a difficulty over here always. However, of late I have begun to see that a return to a Judaic text by Derrida is not necessarily Judaic. Or I'm remembering Derrida's somewhat, Babu was there, that in the discussion, Gift of Death, where he actually makes space for Christianity. Okay. and he's arguing, I'm putting it a little reductively, for a Christianization of the Western imagination, or the Western European imagination, and he sees something interesting in that, the notion of sacrifice, gift, etc. So I no more see the return of our thinkers to texts as necessarily Hindu. However, what is Hindu and not Hindu, and this is a trouble we have had with sometimes Professor Kakkar's work also, is an open question. I would also tend to see this in terms of this very metaphor, the windscreen and the rear view mirror, or what Anurag is saying, is there a double wish there? That between the foreground and the background, the subject also works through a somewhat complex play, and like it becomes sometimes a little difficult. So the analogous problem for me is this. However, your question still remains valid, because the kind of critical reflection Derrida has on religion or on theology, or the way he critiques Christianization in the piece on forgiveness, while turning to the Christian in Gift of Death, is not there in Bose. So that and the kind of journey that psychoanalysis in Bengal saw post-Bose, like the kind of journey Bengal saw post-Tagore, are actually reminiscent of this absence, of this oversight over here. So it's a complex question actually, to which I don't have a straight or a simple answer. And empirically also there are problems over here. Bose had only one female patient in his entire life, for reasons known to us. Women did not come for psychoanalysis, all his patients were men. So his datum is also coming from the kind of experience he's having. Freud, on the other hand, nearly began with female patients. So, and I could not get into that, the work over there that is needed. Bose, of course, had Muslim patients. He has a very interesting case history on a Muslim patient after riots in Calcutta. And it's quite an interesting way of understanding. The second point that you are making with respect to how Bose relates, or how a Bosian kind of formulation, where the maternal, the feminine, the ambivalent, the gender ambivalent, the Mobius of sexuation is highlighted, would still have one important angle over there, and the angle would be that and a point that troubles me actually, a psychoanalytic understanding of the sexes and a sociological understanding of the sexes, a sociological understanding of our society which looks quote-unquote patriarchal, and a certain institution of the name of the father, or the symbolic father, and the rule of the father, the law of the father, etc. And I don't want to trivialize it by saying Kha Panchayat, but all of that. So a sociological theory of gendering, or the sex-gender system, which clearly runs counter to the psychoanalytic theory of sexuation or gendering, is a difficult question, and that is the question where the psychoanalytic and the political again comes in actually. That what is it to not produce, on the one hand, a conservative psychoanalytic theory of sexuation, and a kind of, and I'm sorry to put it this way, unthinking political correctness of critiques of patriarchy. So on the one hand, there is one kind of smoothing because of the emphasis on the political, and you know very well, we ourselves become victims to that in our own university sometimes. And on the other hand, there is a deeply it could become a deeply conservative theory of a celebration of the maternal deity and all of that. So it's a tense question actually, and it's a serious methodological question actually. What is the dialogue between a psychic theory or a theory of the psychic and a theory of the social or a social theory, and what is that hyphen between the psychosocial? And it's not an easy answer to offer over here, and I remain troubled by this question. In fact, the question can be put like this: what is psychoanalytic theory in a deeply patriarchal society? And we tend to think psychoanalytic theory will be generated by case histories, experiences of patients, but then that experience is itself immersed, a cocoon within, a kernel within a perhaps quote unquote, and that can also be problematized, what I'm calling a deeply patriarchal society. So there is a tension between these two, and I agree with you that this tension needs to be removed.
And they say that the patient is also breaking free of the socialization.
Yeah, sometimes,
yes.
yes.
Is also radical.
Yes,
it's
yes.
a political statement
Absolutely.
of the unconscious, which is breaking free
Absolutely.
from the bounds of the social.
Absolutely.
So you may get it there, but then you have to
also work through that.
You have to remind both of you that you work in the same department and you meet each other every day.
just one line. Anurag, allow one. See, I'm remembering one statement by Professor Nandi in one of the interviews I took of him. He wanted to read symptom as not of the patient, but the patient's symptom as a kind of social predicament, okay, which the patient is embodying, and you are taking a more Deleuzian position over here that the patient's symptom is not necessarily the patient's symptom, and it's an interesting way of looking at it. But that would also require a rethinking of psychoanalysis, rethinking of the very theory of symptomatology. Where is the symptom coming from? What is the symptom a symptom of?
Right. I want to sort of leverage a certain illiteracy of mine against your literacy. And I was thinking of the history of science in Bengal. 3 Boses,
Yes.
each of whom has a tremendous encounter with the West.
Yeah.
S.N. Bose with Einstein,
Absolutely.
J.C. Bose with a whole range of biologists,
Absolutely.
and then Gilder Bose with Freud. If you had done it as what is psychoanalysis as a science, a question that Nandi asks, but you don't quite ask, would the answers have been different? Because then you have to begin with Mahendranath Sarkar's statement that science in Bengal is an attempt to rescue science from Western Christianity. And that's the first goal of the Indian Association of the Cultivation of Science. If you had done this in terms of the internal logic of the 3 sciences, would your answer have been different? Because then, I think Spivak and Butler are horribly unnecessary. And Dipesh Chakravarti is a latecomer. Because the very internal theorizing, see, J.C. Bose, Tagore, Geddes, it's also the construction of Shantiniketan, where a post-Germanic science was constructed. There is a greater confidence. I think in a way your narrative domesticates the possibilities of science in Bengal. And that's my worry.
It's very well put,
Yeah.
I must say. And I don't want to domesticate your question by saying it's very well put. I actually want to discuss this. I did not take that up in this, and I hope some remember how I have actually invoked the 3 Boses, because they actually form a very interesting triad. And you have rightly put it actually, S.N. Bose with Einstein, the question of the boson, J.C. Bose, life in plants, and Virendra Shekhar Bose questioning the very repressive hypothesis that forms the kernel of psychoanalysis, or reformulating it. I think I would tend to say you are right. That's a feeling I'm having now. Yes, in a way it could have been seen through science in Bengal. The larger history of, I'm thinking, Brajendranath Sheel, who writes Positive Sciences, and actually the psychology department curriculum was set up by Brajen Sheel. Ashutosh Mukherjee had given him the task. So the 1915 curriculum was Brajen Sheel's curriculum, and he built a curriculum of a certain kind, out of which Bose and all emerge. So in that sense, there is something in the history of science which is not necessarily history of psychoanalysis, which is how I have tried to go today. And something, not in the history of science, in the history and philosophy of science, I think that is what you are pushing for, I think. And putting this whole problematic within the science question, how science was imagined, or how and I'm thinking of even Hindu chemistry, by Professor Chandra. So the whole effort, or Tagore's reading of J.C. Bose. So the entire effort, again 1920s to 1930s, that's a kind of period when this is happening. Are they alternative sciences, or are they original sciences? And is something...
No, are they universal sciences? That's the third question.
That's the third question. Are they universal sciences?
Yes. And I think in that sense, they were searching for a different kind of, the word Bose uses, cosmopolitan.
Yeah. Or even, I don't know whether you would agree with this, give back the West a philosophy of science, where there is a secret claim to universality, at least, if not a overt claim to universality. And I agree with you, actually. Or maybe I shouldn't say this, because that says that I have anticipated your question. I shouldn't say this. No, I don't want to do that also. Because I need to be menaced by the question, troubled by the question, rather than feel comfortable with the question. Yes, you are right in that sense, that it could have been thought from the angle where the psychoanalysis is science, rather than from the angle the culture of psychoanalysis. I think Spivak, Provincializing Europe, all those are coming because I'm actually using the angle of the culture of psychoanalysis. I could have actually looked at it from the question of history and philosophy of science, and maybe I need to do that as a supplement to this, to mark the other of the question.
The other of the question is theosophy.
Yes, theosophy. Yes.
And that will give you a different set of answers.
Yeah.
So both internally and externally.
Yes.
The othering of the discipline creates problems.
Yes. In that sense, whether Western European science is a kind of secular theology, and how we respond to the theological within what came to be known as science is an important question.
It's also time to respond to a few more questions.
Yeah. Okay. But I need to think about it. Well,
no, I just.
You don't need the mic, I think.
No, in fact, that last remark.
Let us have the mic to
last,
oh, because
last remark, I would agree that the Western science is a secular theology, but I'm not really agreeing with the question now. That I agree. And then it's an interesting question.
In fact, that is a question Professor Vishwanathan and others have raised actually for us, and the question of science theology, hegemony. I'm even remembering that book we don't read anymore. Professor Oberoy's book.
Science and Culture.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm Binoy, I'm not an expert in psychology, I'm a journalist, I'm a generalist. But one thing which comes to mind, we talked about the windscreen view and the laterally inverted rear mirror view. But if it is not a static view, the windscreen view is, you said it's the present or the immediate future view. And the rear view mirror is the past view. But don't you think the rear view mirror can also, view image can also become the present or the immediate future view? If it's not static? I think so.
It could be a vanishing present or a vanishing past.
It could be a vanishing past or a past transforming into present and an immediate future.
Possible. Possible.
That is a possibility if it's a dynamic view.
Possible. Possible.
Any more questions?
Actually,
Then, sir, the difference ends there then between the windscreen view and the rear mirror view.
But I thought you said space is
If it
time.
transforms, the rear view image can be transforms itself into present future or an immediate present view or an immediate future view. So that difference ends there in a way. If there is dynamism, what you call a vanishing past, it can be a transformed future.
No, I thought you were making a thing that a metaphor of space is actually a dynamics of time. So depending on which grid you move, you get a different answer.
Yes. That is why I was seeing difference because I was putting it in a particular grid. So yeah, it's a difficulty. This very metaphor has a difficulty because it's working with a time-space curvature.
I think we can look at it this way also.
Yeah.
A vanishing past can be a transforming past, which transforms itself into future.
Could be. You please use the.
I mean, just
A bit louder.
Could you see any philosophical at that time, contemporary, as a common reference point, connected with these kind of things?
You're saying, would I see a philosophical framework at around that time, which gives Bose this kind of framing for psychoanalysis? Although I've really tried to look for it, but then I don't know whether looking for it in that way is the right way. One is to see how have we tried to understand Freud. One is History of Sexuality, Volume 1, Christianization, leading to psychoanalysis. The other is late Foucault, hermeneutics of the subject, who are also making a case for Greek care of the self, the ascetic, and psychoanalysis. So, would you mark it between the Roman Christian millennium and psychoanalysis, or would you mark it with the pagan Greek question, care of the self, ascesis, and psychoanalysis? And you will have different answers or ways of responding to that. What are Girinder Shekhar's clear antecedents? What is he seeing in his rear view mirror? One is secret Vedanta, not professed. A close reading of the Bhagavad Gita, which is still in Bengali, untranslated, where he foregrounds the question of ambivalence in the reading of the Bhagavad Gita. The ambivalence that Arjuna is haunted with, given the dictum to kill. Now he should kill because he is avenging the indignity of a woman. But will he kill his relatives to avenge? So on the one hand, there is the right. On the other hand, there is another right which looks to be wrong, which is the killing of the father or the forefathers. So in that sense, he builds on that. The Yoga Sutras, of course, offer him a reading out of all this. The Puranas offer him a theory of history different from Hegelian history. So he creates a conduit among all of these. The other, of late, I have been thinking, and I'm not sure over here, the group that met regularly had a number of figures. Girindra Shekhar Bose, Brojen Sheel, who is very important in this group. Sometimes Ashutosh Mukherjee would join. The other figure who is important is Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, now made famous because of Swarajin ideas, etc., the Manipal conference, etc. But Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, with his book Studies in Philosophy, which is a take on Vedanta and is a critique of Kant and Hegel. So that is also informing that meaning at that time. So it is a question actually, what is the philosophy of science at work, as Professor Vishwanathan is asking, and what is the philosophy of philosophy at work over here, as this group is trying to create a condition of questioning for itself. So I think it requires a research collective to look into this period, or this, I could call it an era actually, a very dense era between 1905 and maybe 1935, where, and it's very Calcutta, very Bengali also, so I don't want to make it a case for India in that sense, but a serious kind of questioning is happening around a number of philosophical exit points and exit points with respect to philosophy of science, and I don't think I alone have the competence to comment on this. I have only tried to open a few windows and some satellite windows with Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya and a few others, but it is a larger space that needs to be understood to maybe to write a good history of the critical work around this time. So I would put it that.
In our particular space.